Josh Downs, Xavier Hutchinson, Jonathan Mingo, all these day two wide receivers. How do we make sense of them? Let's get into these guys on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Show is on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much to my hashtag everydayers, people listening to the Locked On Vikings podcast each and every day. You can find this show wherever you find audio content. You can also watch the show on YouTube or even on Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Today on the show, I want to talk about some day two wide receivers. We've spent quite a bit of breath on guys like Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston, Jackson Smith-Njigba. But what about these guys that probably won't go in the first round, like Joshua Downs? Seems like more of a second round guy. Xavier Hutchinson, maybe later. Jonathan Mingo, maybe later. These day two guys get a little bit more interesting because once you get to the second and third round, you start to be okay with some blemishes. You know, when I'm talking about a first round player, every negative is kind of okay, and this is like pretty unacceptable unless there's something super substantial making you kind of think twice about it. Anthony Richardson has this problem, but he's so much of an athlete, he's still worth a first round pick. But with, Jackson Smith-Njigba, his top speed didn't really show up on the field, but he's so crazy good at all this other stuff that, maybe there's something else that maybe he's worth it. But once we get into the day two guys, they start to be, all right, well, there just are going to be some flaws here. And there's just this kind of threshold of flaws that, you just kind of put up with, and they just are still second and third round guys instead of, in spite of them. So I want to hit you with three of those guys today. Not the only three by any means, but the three guys I'm going to talk about today. First is Josh Downs. Then we will, out of UNC, then we'll go to Arizona State's Xavier Hutchinson, and then we'll go to Ole Miss, Jonathan Mingo, who's a very strange case. But first, let's go to Josh Downs. Now, some people might disagree with me characterizing him as a day two guy at all, and that's okay. I actually don't love him at all. And he's not my favorite guy on this list, which is, I think, a scorching take. That it's like consensus-wise, Joshua Downs is pretty high up on people's lists. But here is what I'm going to say about Josh Downs. If you have read anything about Josh Downs or listened to anything about Josh Downs, it has almost certainly been about his size. And I'm really disappointed by that. I think there is a lot more to talk about with Josh Downs than the fact that he is 5'8", 170. Now, 5'8", 170, that's a podcaster, all right? So hashtag that's a podcaster. But and there are issues with that, right? But I think the primary issue I have with Josh Downs is not that. If it were just his size, I would have a really easy time overlooking it because he has a pretty good catch radius, and a very good catch radius for his size, an okay catch radius in general. But that, the box I would say is checked good enough. He has the ability to play around his size in the same way that somebody like Zay Flowers does, where, there are a lot of moments in routes against certain coverages, especially where you're getting walled, where they're catch defenders trying to get you. And essentially that is underneath defenders trying to use their physicality to prevent or at least disrupt your downfield route. And you have to get through them. If you're a big body guy, you can just blow through those dudes like you're a bulldozer. That's great. But as a guy like Josh Downs, who is too small, he has to go around. Now, my favorite guy that does this is Jordan Addison from this draft. Addison goes around, but then he restacks. He will go around the guy, and then he will realign. And that's a really important habit because the quarterback is expecting you to be at a certain place at a certain time, no matter what the route is. There's a place that ball is supposed to be and a time that ball is supposed to be hitting a wide receiver. If you are not in that place, the quarterback can adjust for this. And I think actually Kirk Cousins is decent at that. good enough at that, at least for me to not be worried about it with somebody like Zay Flowers. And Zay Flowers to the Vikings actually adore. I love that. I don't think they're going to be able to get him though. But it's still a knock on you as a prospect if your quarterback is going to have to kind of handhold you through that. Is going to have to adjust their spacing of the way they throw, and their throw is going to get that much harder because now they have to adjust their aiming point on the fly because you can't get around a wall defender and get back onto your alignment. It's a bad habit, and it's way easier to fix that with the wide receiver, right? And that's a habit that Downs has. A lot of small guys have it, and it's not the worst thing in the world, and it's certainly better than just getting like kind of blown up and just like getting redirected super hard and not making it to your spot at all. At least he's out there at the right time. And then even as a blocker, while I mean Downs is not the guy you want at the point of attack on a run play, he's still fighting, and there's a lot of want to. And I actually think his technique could be improved without too much effort, and I actually think his blocking has a little bit of room to get better. But obviously not going to be a strength. Okay, so he's a small guy, and that's how small receivers get affected by being small. But I think the biggest thing we usually think of when he's small is, well, can he, high point to fade? And he's got that on his tape. Yeah, he totally can. What bugs me more with Josh Downs is the way he sets up routes is really a mess. And I think a lot of that needs to be retaught. And because there is sort of this ceiling on him because of his size, right? He can never be that do-it-all guy. There's just certain stuff that he just won't be capable of, stuff that requires you to bluff certain angle blocks, stuff that Jonathan Mingo does. We'll get to him. There's just certain stuff you can't ask him to do. And because you can't ask it in the run game, that means you can't bluff it for the pass game. And so it's just going to put a limit on how he is. So if the guy's going to have that kind of ceiling, I need him to not also need a whole bunch of work to reach it. And he needs a whole bunch of work. I think people are not talking about this enough because it's interesting enough to talk about his size, I guess. It's a thing. And like you can talk about his size till you're blue in the face and then kind of feel like you've talked about Josh Downs. But here's the real headline with Josh Downs. He doesn't set up his routes very well at all, I don't think. In particular, so there's a concept in route running. I talked about it a little bit in my How to Scout Wide Receivers episode that I did when I was on vacation a couple weeks ago, where you want to close space to create space. You want to get up into somebody's face before you break off a route. And for the most part with wide receivers, they have the leeway to add whatever razzle dazzle they want to get, as long as they're at the spot they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be there. From the snap to that point, they can kind of do whatever they got to do to beat the corner. And as a receiver, what I'm looking at is how much are you influencing corners? How much are you getting them to turn their hips around? How much are you getting into their face and forcing them to react to you? But what Downs will do is he'll do that kind of shimmy, that wiggle that wide receivers always do, but he'll do it like 3, sometimes even 4 yards ahead of the D-back. And the D-back doesn't have to respond if you're a corner. I talked about this with Cam Smith. He's really good at not responding here. If the corner is good, he will be able to just sit back and watch. And so, you can do all the shimmy, shake, and razzle dazzle. You can bust a whole dance routine up there if you want, but not until you actually are coming at me and you're outside of my frame, my actual like physical presence, do I have to react to you. And so what Downs does is he ends up wasting a bunch of time. Sometimes he'll do really weird release moves that are usually aimed at beating press coverage against a guy that's 10 yards off of him who won't respond to it at all. And now you're just kind of running your route that much slower. It seems like he has a lot of moves and techniques that he has trained. He's got stuff he knows how to do, but I don't know if he knows quite how to string it together into a cohesive plan yet. And I think that is the work that he needs. So if I can teach him to restack, and maybe you look at Keenum and Cardell and you say, yeah, he can totally teach those things, and I'm totally comfortable with that. And if the Vikings take him, then that kind of has to be the logic, right? But if I can have Keenum and Cardell teach him how to restack after he's, avoided that wall defender, if I can get him back onto his alignment so he can run the route at the right place, and if I can get him to string some of those moves together a little bit, then I think he has a future in the NFL. But there is a lot of work to put together, And what you get is like a complementary piece that will kind of always be a complementary piece. So for that reason, I'm not as big on Josh Downs as a lot of people are. But I want to really, really emphasize that it's not the size that bugs me. I'm not just saying small receiver won't make it, because I love Addison. I love Smith and Jigba. I can be talked into a small receiver, but this guy's got too many subtleties missing from his game. I still want to talk about Xavier Hutchinson. I still want to talk about Jonathan Mingo. But first, I want to talk to you about Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the planet. The protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. We can all be weak sometimes, okay? We all get a chocolatey craving in the middle of the night or whatever, I don't know. I don't judge. I'm not your dad. But whenever you get it and you want to have something chocolatey, reach for a Built Bar. They only have 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar. You can wake up in the middle of the night, house one of these puppies, go back to bed, and not feel like you broke any kind of diet or anything like that. 17 grams of protein in one of these bad boys as well. So it works as like an after workout bar, even though it totally doesn't taste like it. You're totally pulling one over on your lizard brain. And right now, you don't even need to wait to get a box delivered. You can run right down to your local Walmart or Sam's Club right now. But you can also still get specialty flavors on built.com, or if you just prefer to have it delivered right to your door, that is still, of course, an option. So if you're close to a Walmart or Sam's Club, or if you just want to go to built.com, go check out Built. Grab a 13-bar box with some of our hit flavors like brownie, batter, puff, and churro puff at Sam's Club, or whatever you want. You can thank me later. Thanks once again to the hashtag Everydayers listening to the Locked On Vikings podcast each and every day. I would also love it if you went and checked out my Patreon page. Patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL just released the big Anthony Richardson video with all of my thoughts. If you listened to the podcast a while ago, I said I would upload that. Finally did, and you can actually watch it whether or not you have joined, but I'd still love you to join anyways. Also, check out LockedOnPodcast.com/newsletters. The draft newsletter is written by our very own Luke Inman here at the Locked On Network. But there's newsletters for like everything. Go check it out. There's way more options than you think. Let me move on by talking about Xavier Hutchinson out of Arizona State. He is definitely the guy I've done the least work on. So of these three. So, apologies if I missed something about him that you might know. Please do let me know though, because I do want to know. So leave it in the YouTube comments or tweet it at me or whatever. But my understanding of Xavier Hutchinson was that he was supposed to test a lot better than he did. And that's probably something that is going to is going to sink him a lot on draft boards, because there are, again, similarly to Josh Downs, a lot of little subtleties that he just does not do well. He's got a couple of bad habits in terms of his hand usage. So when you are trying to get through a guy, when it's press coverage and you're running a go route, right? You got to get past that corner. You want to get up and around him. You want to get past him somehow, aka stack him. But then again, you have to get back onto your alignment. So the easiest way to do that is through like pass rush moves. And you'll see receivers do a rip move looking like they're, Daniil Hunter out there. With Hutchinson, he will often attack with kind of the wrong arm. Like, I think it's the arm it feels the longest with, but this is just a bad habit. It's just something that needs to get ironed out, or he will just struggle against other press stuff. What I think you're getting with him is kind of a twitchy after catch guy. So as a complementary piece, I don't mind it. But again, he's one of those guys that like is going to need to iron out stuff like that. Again, similarly with Downs, there isn't a lot of cohesion to the actual plan he uses. Now, here's the deal. If you read and go listen to other people talk about Xavier Hutchinson, the thing you'll hear a lot about him is that his inside releases are very, very good. And I tend to agree with that, but I think they're all like vibes and ballin'. Like he's, the old thing about like there are hoopers and there are basketball players. He's a hooper. He's definitely kind of doing this on all athleticism and vibes and feels without actually having honed or like polished technique. I think his releases I'm going to call them inconsistent, but there are a whole bunch of really sick highlights where he'll do the thing. I talked about this a ton with Jordan Addison. I'm in love with Addison, who does this all the time, where say you're running a go route, he'll release really hard to the outside of the cornerback's frame, forcing the cornerback to turn his hips, bail, and turn to the outside, and then he'll be able to cut it back in, and it's like a post route or something, or sometimes just a go route that maybe he's just fading to the inside a little bit to get separation. And it's a very cool move that I like a lot, but that kind of only works against off coverage, and in press worlds, it hasn't been, that kind of thing isn't as successful. You don't have enough room to work with. You don't have space to kind of set something up, then knock it down. And he doesn't stand up to contact as well as I would hope. And he doesn't, like, he will get redirected on his route, but then he'll just make the stupidest catch you've ever seen. And it's like, all right, okay, whatever. And there are a lot of times where he will do something wrong, get himself into a bad situation, and then just kind of pure God-given talents get him out of that situation. But then he didn't test very well. And he said he tested okay. It was fine. He ended up, let me see if I can pull it up here. He ran like a 4.53. That's not great. Good 10 split, but not a great 40. He ran, a 6.913 cone. That's fine. It'll do. A 36-inch vertical. It'll do. Bad broad jump, bad shuttle as well. So he did not test very well. And that obviously raises some concerns. Hey, why didn't all of the athleticism it looked like you had on tape show up in the testing? That's a question that you kind of have to decide how you feel about. Personally, I don't feel awful about it because a lot of his athleticism to me is sort of quick twitch, and a lot of it is body control and like catch radius stuff, which there isn't really a combine measure that, like, there's the vertical jump, but that's literally just a vertical jump. There's nothing really testing how well you can like twist and torque your body to catch a ball at a weird angle, which he's pretty good at. And I think that's the kind of athleticism. And then the quick twitch stuff, you kind of hope you see it with the explosion scores, like the broad jump and the shuttle and stuff like that, and you don't see it. But I do see enough of it on tape where he at least can, like, he looks comfortable, I guess. Maybe that's the way it is. And that comfort maybe is allowing him to break off the ball and off of the line of scrimmage and stuff faster than his actual like physical body can run the 3-cone. But not unlike Downs, and I think to a greater degree than Downs, because I don't think he's far as far along the path as Downs is. It is another guy that's kind of gonna only ever be a complimentary piece, and you need to do work to make him a complimentary piece. So I'm not going to be as interested. And so I have both Downs and Hutchinson kind of closer to the bottom of day 3. I have Hutchinson. I mean, if you took him at 87 all the way in the third round, if he fell all that far, I'd be okay with it. With Josh Downs, if that happened, that would actually be a pretty great outcome, right? If Josh Downs fell all the way to 87, that is the point at which you're going, yeah, it's fine that you're small. We're in the third round here. But I have these guys kind of at the back end parts of day 2. I don't want my team to take these guys in the 40s or in the 30s, where I think there will be greater talents available, even if you have to go to other positions. But Jonathan Mingo is another story. He's a really interesting eval and a guy that I find difficult to talk about because there's so much stuff about his college experience that is just built to distract you. Let me explain what I mean. So, Ole Miss, our good buddy Lane Kiffin. Remember that one time when he was like maybe going to be the head coach of the Vikings after the Vikings have fired Zimmer, and I talked myself into it for like 10 seconds. So his offense is weird, and it was weird, I think, out of a lot of necessity. I think he's tailored offenses in the past for what his players can do. And in this case, Ole Miss has an stinky quarterback. Please, nobody tell me that Jackson Dart is supposed to be a first-round quarterback next year. That dude is undraftable. He better have the senior season of senior seasons, because that dude is not an NFL player. I will see you on the New Orleans Breakers, Jackson. I shouldn't be that mean. This kid is like a 22-year-old kid. My apologies, Jackson. I let that get away from myself. But anyways, the quarterback struggled. And when the quarterback struggled, I think you have to do some stuff. But also, Lane Kiffin is not a drop back, spread them out, pro style offense kind of guy. So you get a lot of the same problems that you get when you're like evaluating someone from Tennessee. Hey, this offense is just not a pro offense. This is just not what you're going to see in the pros. So how do you take a guy who is being asked to do one thing and project how he'll do when he's being asked to do what you're going to have him do? And with Mingo, he was a tight end. They listed him as a wide receiver. He was a tight end. He lined up as a tight end. He blocked like a tight end. He did tight end stuff. They used him like a tight end. And they did so because he can do it like a tight end. His blocking is insane. And I know leading with blocking for a wide receiver is so weird. But he was a tight end. He did it well. He's 220 pounds, but he blocked like he's about 270. It was awesome. It's genuinely nutty. A lot of people have hyped up his blocking, and I've gotten a few people asking me, hey, is that blocking like really that good? Yes. Oh my God. Yes, it is that good. I saw him like flash one guy, like hit one guy and then flip his hips all the way, like a full 90 degrees and then like block another guy. Like he was a combo blocking guard reacting to someone shooting a gap. He does like split zone blocking where he'll come across, block an edge rusher, block a linebacker, sunning linebackers. I mean, actually blowing linebackers up. Like he blocks like a tight end, but he didn't run like a tight end at the combine. He ran in the 4.4s. He, again, only 220 pounds, big frame body, has the athletic profile of a wide receiver, but with the blocking skill set of a tight end. That guy would be a first round pick if it weren't for blank, right? So what's the catch here? You may be asking yourself. Part of it is he didn't look fast. He tested really fast, but it's kind of the opposite problem as Xavier Hutchinson. He tested way better than he was supposed to. And I wonder that speed, here's where I am on his speed. It's a very difficult thing to discern, again, because a lot of what he did was in the tackle boxes, doing tight end stuff, doing weird play action things that don't necessarily showcase the greatest skills a wide receiver may have. But there is one play. It's against, I want to say, Vanderbilt. I might be wrong. There's a tunnel screen that he took to the house. If you're a big college football fan, you probably know what I'm talking about. But that is one of the few scenarios where there is no reason to go 80%. As a wide receiver, if you're a really fast receiver especially, there's a reason to go 80%. You don't want to outrun your quarterback's arm, right? You don't want to run so hard that you catch the safety and get him to, bail out so hard you can't go deep, right? There are ways to, moderate your speed and sort of put a speed limit on yourself. And then when the ball gets thrown, you kick into that extra gear. You kind of should deploy your speed wisely and in ways that set you up for possible deception. If you need to break down and run a curl route, you shouldn't run full speed if you can't break down from full speed, right? And I think there were a lot of instances of that with Mingo. So maybe there's reasons that he couldn't run full speed, but there were times when it really did not look like he was outrunning a guy like the LSU game. He went up against Mekhi Gardner, who will maybe get drafted. Mekhi Gardner ran a 4.5 something, ran like a full 10th slower than Jonathan Mingo, but Jonathan Mingo couldn't leave him in situations like a go ball, right? So maybe he was just going 80% speed there. But then he gets that tunnel screen and you see him actually turn on the jets and oh boy, there they are. So you can see him capable of being fast. He ran fast. I think he can be fast. And I think for whatever reason at Ole Miss, he wasn't. And I wouldn't be surprised to learn that is because he thought he would outrun his quarterback's arm. And you go up to your quarterback and you say, okay, how far do you need me? How far before you can't throw to me anymore, right? 40 yards out, 50 yards out. When can you not throw to me anymore? And I'll make sure I don't cross that line, even if it means I have to slow myself up a little bit. That's good. That's a good thing that he should be doing. So maybe there's something like that. It's the kind of thing that you would ask him about in a meeting. Say, well, were you dogging this? Were you dogging this on purpose? Because there's strategic reasons to dog it, or was this just not your fastest day? Other than that, all that other stuff, I talked about with Downs, how you're trying to close space to create space. He does that very well, and he can kind of stack up cornerbacks and then leave them. And the thing about him, though, is that there just isn't a lot of production. He didn't get a lot of yards. So if you're one of those people that looks at college football and says, I just want the receiver that did the most for his team and got the most yards, you're not going to be that into Mingo. But hopefully, if you've been listening to this show for a while, you know there's a lot more to it than that. And in that Ole Miss offense, that weird Lane Kiffin offense with a crappy quarterback who missed a whole bunch of great throws, by the way, that could have been opportunities for more production. So there's that to factor in. But I think the bigger factor is just that it is an offense that often has Mingo blocking or doing a route that bluffs a block, which just is not going to be a big, deep, home run ball. But if you wanted him to do the home run balls, I think he had a decent ability to do that. And if nothing else, a big body to box out down the field if that's the way this has to go down. I like Jonathan Mingo a lot. And I think the problems with him are not necessarily like weaknesses in his game per se, as much as they are obfuscations, because Lane Kiffin's weird, dude. And you just kind of have to remember that this is a Lane Kiffin offense. And hope that the way the offense was designed was not so designed because there's something Jonathan Mingo couldn't do and they had to work around it. But I think it's more that there's something Jonathan Mingo can do, which is block very, very well. And they were trying to lean into it and take the most advantage of it as they could. And you can do that as well in the NFL to great effect. And especially if you have a serious boy at quarterback, then you can take advantage of a lot of other skill sets as well. I really like Mingo. I would actually, if they ended up with a pick in middle of the second round, I would totally take Mingo there. I'm that high on him. Not as high on Downs, not as high on Hutchinson. And yes, you heard me right. I would take Jonathan Mingo before I took either of those guys. Then I would take Downs. And then I think Xavier Hutchinson is so much rawer than Downs. I think there's actually a pretty sizable gap there between him and the other two. So there's a few guys. There's other of these wide receivers, Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt, the Tennessee guys that are going to kind of have that same, how do I evaluate this guy when he's running when he's running in such a weird offense? There's that Mims guy from Oklahoma. There's a lot of other day two receivers, and the odds of the Vikings taking a day two receiver, I think, are pretty high. I think the most, barring a trade, which is insanely likely, I think the most likely permutation would be for the Vikings to go cornerback in the first part of the draft, because there's so many corners that at least I would take at 20. There's 6 corners I would take at 23. One of them's going to fall. You're not going to have 6 corners go in the top 22 picks. And then once you get to the day 2 part, that's when wide receivers come in play a little bit more, because those top upper echelon wide receivers, the guys you'd have to kind of pick at 14, 15 to get are not worth taking at 14, 15, I think, in my opinion. But I think they're going to go there. And I think you get a little bit more bang for your buck if you wait till day 2. You get a guy with a little bit more blemish, but you only had to spend pick 87 on it. So that's where I'm at on these guys. I will see you all tomorrow. In the meantime, check out Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes with Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino. Those guys are doing a daily show on the NFL draft, so go bone up. I will see you all tomorrow, and we are rapidly approaching draft time. Get excited, y'all. And as always, Skol.